screen says the host will let him in.
We have to wait for Reverend Barnes to hit it. You just have to wait.
Okay, good. Okay, bye. Easy.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Reverend Robbie Craig with New Faith Baptist Church. New Faith Baptist Church is in Matteson, Illinois, and our pastors are the Reverend Dr. Trinell D. Felder and Reverend Dr. Alexis L. Felder. We are one church on 2 continents and 3 countries in 22 locations, and we live and give to the glory of God. We're glad that you're able to join us this morning on our conversations on justice. And today, what we'll be talking about is know your rights. And we know that that is so important because what we have seen in the media over the last year or more, last couple of years, is different instances where people have been stopped, and the what has happened has been traumatic in some cases in terms of leading to death or some type of abuse. So we want to have a good understanding of how we need to what it means to know our rights, and when we come in contact with police, that how we what we do when we encounter police or any other government authority, and knowing what our rights are and how we should respond to that. We have a wonderful panel for you today, and we would like for them to introduce themselves. And so I will start with uh, Liz Jordan. She's with the ACLU. If you can introduce yourselves to us this morning.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Liz Jordan. My pronouns are she, her. I am a attorney at the ACLU of Illinois in our Police Practices Project. So there we bring lawsuits against police departments and sometimes individual police officers who have violated the rights of people. We also represent people through administrative complaints, and we advocate for changes on the local and state level. So happy to be here and to help inform folks about their constitutional rights.
Thank you so much. Judge Henry.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Judge Henry. I am a Cook County Circuit Court judge. Prior to being a judge, I was a Cook County Public Defender for 20 years. And prior to that, I was a Cook County Public Guardian for 3 years. At this point, I am assigned to the Maywood Courthouse, and I cover some civil cases. I also do misdemeanors, traffic. Right now, I am assigned to the felony with the prelim room, which means that I am the person that decides. I'm the person that decides whether the case goes forward to a trial courtroom or whether the case gets dismissed at the point it's in my courtroom.
Thank you. Mia Carter.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. My name is Mia Carter. I work at the Village of Matteson Police Department. This is my 26th year with the department. My current assignment is I am in the Community Policing Bureau. So we have the School Resource Officer Program. We have the Community Police Representative Program, or your local community policing officer. And I usually handle all of the mediations and complaints within our department. So I'm happy to be here. This is my 2nd year. So thanks for inviting me back.
Thank you. Mr. Ali.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Cherie. It's good to
Good
see
morning, David. I was like, is that David?
you. My name is David Ali. I am the president and co-founder, along with Daryl Ashley. You know, one of you guys know Daryl. Be Relevant. And also the president of a social group called Group 39. It's a pleasure to be with you guys, and I hope to learn a lot. I was always listening to Cherie. I always managed to learn something. So I'm looking forward to being part of this panel, and thank you guys again.
Thank you. And Daryl, you would like to introduce yourself?
I'm doing well, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Craig. Hi, my name is Daryl Ashley. Uh, also, David Ali and I have been friends since high school, since our sophomore year of high school. And I am the vice president of Be Relevant, which is a nonprofit organization in which what we are trying to bring awareness to the law enforcement and judicial system to the youth out here in our communities. Also, I'm a member of New Faith Baptist Church. I run the security detail for Pastor Felder and Alexis Felder. And I know the Craigs well. Actually, I've been knowing Mr. Craig probably since I was a young man playing basketball, but that's another story. And I just retired from the Cook County Sheriff's Department, Police Department, which I was a police officer for 28 years. I also was in community relations where I work with the public to try to restore the relationship between the public and the police department. I also was a juvenile officer with the department. I also was a detective with the department. And I also was part of the school resource officer program, in which I kind of helped implement that. So it's been a pleasure and an honor to be able to assist in any way I can in this meeting that you all have today. Also, I know Judge Henry. She know me from a mutual friend, which is Tim Parker. I've met and worked on a campaign quite a few times.
Yeah.
You probably just don't know my face right now.
So you were the man behind the scenes.
There you go. There you go. Yep. So anyways, it's a pleasure to be honored to be a part of this meeting.
Okay. And I'd like Rhonda Walton to introduce herself. She's part of the Justice Ministry, and she was the person who's instrumental in coming to me and saying, Reverend Robbie, we really need to know your rights. And so, Rhonda, you want to share with us anything this morning?
Well, you pretty much did. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm Rhonda Walton from the Justice Ministry at New Faith Baptist Church International, and I am one of the co-chairs.
Thank you. And Reverend Vines, would you like to introduce yourself this morning?
Good morning, everyone. Reverend Sellers Vines. I'm Minister over Evangelism, Outreach, Missions, and Justice. And I just wanted to thank the Justice Ministry for pushing the agenda to make sure that we are equipped, to move things forward in our society forward. So thank you all.
Okay, so I'd just like to just start with, we've seen in the media all of these instances where we've seen African Americans being detained and things going sideways or going the wrong way in terms of either they in some way resisted arrest or didn't acknowledge a police officer. How should we be responding when we are engaged by police officers? And we can start, anyone on the panel can start us out on the conversation.
I think that Daryl, being a former officer, he would probably know best how we should address the officer once we encounter them. He can tell us how to do it from an officer's point of view.
Okay, well, that's the segue for me to get in the conversation today. Thanks. Well, normally, being pulled over by a police officer, it really reflects on how a lot of times.
I ask you to hold on 1 second and ask everybody to mute their phones. We hear background noise and talking, so we ask that you mute your phones so we can hear clearly what the speaker is saying. I'm sorry, Daryl, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Because I'm trying to work with this equipment and I'm not too good with it, so I'm messing up myself here as well. So a lot of time when a police officer, let's just do this way, when a police officer is out there working, doing this 10-hour, 8-hour shift, whatever department specifies at that time, a lot of times what the public don't understand is police officers, especially the younger generation, that the police officers are just as human as anyone else, and they have bad days and good days as well. So a lot of time when a police officer is doing a traffic stop, they really don't know the unknown. So a lot of times when they're exiting a vehicle, they walking up to the vehicle, they always going with the training, or they should be going with the training that they had encountered throughout the time of their profession. So a lot of time, the first thing they do is his safety as well as the person that's being pulled over safety as well. So the officers got a shield put up at that time for him to go home at night and for that person who's driving to go home as well. But a lot of times police officers have problems too at home, and sometimes they might not be the most pleasant person, he or she, when they come through the traffic stop. And surely sometimes the subject might not as well. So a lot of times the reflection of the person who's in the car is more important than the officer in some cases, because if the officer say license and registration, hypothetically, if the officer say license and registration, please. If that person come back and say, well, what you pull me over for? Well, that's, sometimes you get tested, and a lot of times in a lot of instances, that's when things go wrong. Now that officer should have more professionalism and, ask that question again and so forth and so on. Now, of course, with training today and way training is being presented today is that a lot of time these officers are being learned to de-escalate, you know what I'm saying, situation. So if a person, decide not to get a license and all this and all that, then that officer could say, okay, well, you know what, have a nice day, and he can keep on moving because that officer already has that person's information. So you can always come back later on down the line and either pull that person or somehow get in contact with that person. It might not be that officer, it might be somebody from that particular department. So that being said, a lot of times is that if the subject, and when I refer to subject, the person who getting pulled over, a lot of times if that person just conform or be taught and be trained to conform to what the officer is expressing or asking, then a lot of times the situations are going a little bit more smooth. So a lot of time, because you got to understand there's two different attitudes or two different demeanors at that time. That other person in the car might be in a bad demeanor at that time, but surely that officer can be in the same position as well. But if they both doing well, 9 out of 10, you'll probably walk out of there without a citation if you conform to what it is that you being pulled over for. Now I hear some feedback. I don't know if it's me or someone else, so it sounds like someone else is talking. But that being said, a lot of times, 80% of the times or 90% of the time, you could talk your way out of a situation with the police officer if you be more in tune of what the officers are asking you to do.
Well, and I hear that, as an African American, we often feel that you get pulled over just for driving while being black. That's a common statement and feeling within our community. I can tell you about a situation where Larry, my husband, wasn't pulled over, but we were just at the grocery store at Walmart, and he was waiting for me in the car. He was just sitting there waiting for me. We had already gone to another store, so he had a bunch of groceries in the car, and he was approached by officers saying that he had stole the stuff that was in his car. And the only thing that really de-escalated at the time that they approached him, they had one on each side of him. The only thing that actually de-escalated is that I just happened to be walking out of the store with the grocery cart, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was so late. What you gonna do? Have me arrested?" Because I didn't know that they were walking on the side of him because they were saying something to him. I was just making a joke out of it. And then when they looked at it, they looked at him and walked away because they said that he was with a young lady with purple hair and that they had stole the food and they had followed him out the store and saw the stuff in his car. You know what I'm saying? And so.
Okay, so can I, not to intervene, but so let me ask you this.
Excuse me 1 second. Excuse me 1 second, Officer Ashley. If you can lift your camera up just a bit, you're there. You go. That's better. Yeah. We got to see that. We have to see all of you, sir.
Check you out, Reverend.
Thank you.
So Reverend Craig. So let's back for a minute. So in the instance of that point, was the police called? Did someone from the grocery store call and said that an individual was stealing out the store, or did the police officer randomly approach Mr. Craig just because Mr. Craig was coming out the store with groceries? You know what I'm saying?
He was randomly approached.
Oh, so they just you just ran across some bad officers at that time. You know what I'm saying? Because I mean, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. You have some bad officers in the pack, just like you might have some bad ministers in the church. We don't know. You got bad people everywhere. Okay. But that badness, which is sad to say, that badness outweighs the goodness. 90% of the police department, and I've worked around a lot of them. Like I said, I've been in the department for 28 years. You know, I've never had a write-up, and normally the persons who I work with have never had a write-up. And you know a couple of them because they frequent the church as well. Okay. So, but you got your one or two. Now, let's switch the gears for a minute.
Well, I want to bring you some other voices. I appreciate what you're saying. So, Ms. Jordan, Attorney Jordan, would you like to comment?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to jump in and offer another perspective. So from the lawyer's perspective and from a constitutional rights perspective, I would say never try to talk your way out of any sort of interaction with an officer, because you have the right to remain silent, and anything you say will definitely be used against you. So the things that you have to say when you've been stopped or questioned are: if you're asked your name, you have to give your name. If you're asked for your ID and you've been detained, you do have to give your ID, but you do not have to offer any sort of explanation for why you think you've been stopped. You do not have to answer any questions, especially if you have not been detained. If you have not been detained, you're free to go. If you have been detained, that's when you have to give your name. If you've been arrested, then you should not say another word beyond, "I invoke my right against self-incrimination. Can I please talk to a lawyer?" And that especially goes toward people under the age of 18. So I know that this is an event targeted at kind of both, but particularly with minors. You may have seen in the news, Illinois just passed a law making it the first and only state in the nation to prohibit officers from lying to minors when interrogating them. But that doesn't go into effect until next January. So currently, today, officers can and do, in fact, lie to minors when questioning them in order to get a confession. That also, even when it does go into effect, does not apply to adults. So when officers are questioning people, they can and do, they're legally allowed to use falsehoods in order to get information. So I would say the bare minimum. Don't be hostile, right? Like, from a practical sense, you want to be able to go home. So give the information that you're constitutionally required to give and leave it at that. That would be my sort of, if I'm counseling a client or my cousins, like, those are the things that I'm telling them.
Okay. Can I piggyback on something that the lawyer just said about when it comes to juvenile?
Real quickly.
Yes. So actually, it's just information. So when it comes to juveniles like that, officers are really not allowed to question juvenile subjects unless they have a grown-up or another juvenile officer in sight to represent that juvenile when they're asking them questions. That's all I just want to piggyback on.
Okay. That was it. And so, Mia, I just wanted to bring you in because you do work with a lot of juveniles as well as adults in your particular program. And I know you have programs where you actually are coaching and helping develop juveniles. And so, and you spoke to us before on how they should respond, because sometimes juveniles are hot-headed. And so, what is your response?
I definitely agree with some of the things the officers and the lawyer is saying, but for me in particular, when I have the conversation with kids, and we do several presentations on how to interact with the police, the very first thing that I always tell them, when you have interaction with the police, that is not the time to assert your independence and act like how much you know. You can set the whole tone of the conversation with the first 5 or 6 words out your mouth. You know, especially if you know you have committed a violation. If you know you were speeding and you got pulled over, don't get mad at the officer for coming up because you were actually speeding. Now, sometimes they do pull people over for reasons that, you know, we all see in the media, but we have a checklist that we give kids and things that we tell parents to tell their kid. And one of the biggest things is don't move when the officer comes up to the car. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. You know, when he walks up, he's either going to walk up on the driver's side, or if it's two officers, one will come up on the passenger side. One of the biggest questions I get all the time is, why are there 3 or 4 cars behind one car on a traffic stop? You know, you really think, oh my God, I ran a light. Why do you have all of these officers? But when you're in a small suburban town, there's only 1 officer per car, and they are required to have backup on a traffic stop. So now you have 2 cars. If there's 5 or 6 people in the car, you might have a 3rd car. If they've run your license plate and your license plate has come back with a criminal hit for something, they may conduct a felony traffic stop, which is a little more intense. So there's a lot of things that you as a driver maybe aren't aware of procedural wise. So now you're on the defense. Oh, here comes the officer. He's got his hand on his gun and he's walking up to my car. Well, that's actually procedure for him to do that, him or her to do that. So it's not necessarily because you're Black, it's because it's procedure. But we tell the kids, don't move your hands, don't reach for your phone, don't do any of that. Like to the lawyer's point, answer the question. What is your name? Let me see your driver's license. Sometimes the officers will say, well, where are you going in such a hurry? And the lawyer's right, you don't have to answer that. You can say, I'm not telling you, you can do all of those things, but you'll set the whole tone of that conversation. To the other officer's point, he may decide to give you a warning instead of the actual ticket if you're more cooperative. But we tell them it's okay for you to ask questions. You know, sometimes, to the other officer's point, if you got a bad apple and you got an officer that's already made up his mind how he feels about certain people, he's already gonna come to your car with a bad attitude or some nonsense or something. But it's okay for you to ask, well, you know, why'd you pull me over? Things like that. But don't try to be assertive in that instance. I tell the kids, take the fine, the ticket or whatever, go home and tell your parents, let your parents handle it. But one of the things people don't do too much when they have a negative interaction with the officer, they don't come and report it. So when you see on the news things like when the officer has done something really egregious and there's nothing in his personnel file and you kind of wonder why that happened. If you have a bad interaction or you feel like your rights have been violated or you've been mistreated, any of those things, I encourage people to go to that local municipality and file a complaint. Let your feelings be known on how that interaction was with the police officer. We can't address it from a training perspective if we don't know. Training is not the same. Your larger departments, so the Cook County Sheriff's Department or something, we get de-escalation training. We get all of these things. Your smaller, more rural departments, they don't. They don't always fall. Like, so if you drive in someplace and you get pulled over by a sheriff's department in a really backwoods town, they probably aren't going to do the same thing that you'll get from an officer who's been properly trained. Training sometimes is an issue. Retraining is an issue. But if we don't know that we have an officer out there doing things he's not supposed to be doing, we can't address it from a training perspective. We can't give him a performance improvement plan. We can't do any of those things. So when I have conversations with parents and kids, I tell them, answer the officer's question. If the officer is mistreating you or calls you out your name, just continue to comply so that you can go home and then address it at a later time.
Thank you. And Judge Henry, I'm sorry, David, you're about to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to pose the question that I think that we all suffer from in terms of lack of knowledge, and that's adults and minors. By us not understanding and knowing the difference between being detained and being stopped.
Okay.
You know, just like when you were talking about the situation with your husband sitting in his car in a parking lot, the officers walked up. If he don't know the difference between himself being detained by them officers or him just being questioned, then he won't know how to he don't know what he should and shouldn't say, because there's a big difference. If they just walk up on you and start asking you to get out your car, this and that and other, they haven't been called, you're not being detained. So there's certain, I would assume there's certain things that you don't have to comply with, right? But if they hit them lights and them sirens on you and pull you over, aren't you automatically being detained?
No.
Or are you just being, I mean, what's the difference?
A lot of time. Anyone else want to
go ahead, Daryl.
Okay, a lot of times. So, what's your name, young lady? The work at Mass.
Mia.
Yeah. So she's dead on it. She's dead on it. But here's the difference between detained and just being stopped. So once I conduct a traffic stop, or when I was working at that time, when I conduct a traffic stop, I'm giving our communications or the radio room information from your license plate. Now, sometimes, which what we call a file. So a lot of times when I give them that information, your driver's license might not be attached to your plate. So now, once I pull you over, I'm conducting the traffic stop. Now, once I go to you, I talk to you, blah, 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 and say license and registration. You give me your license, I go back to the car, she runs your license, and now your whole file probably come up on that file. Once
No,
that
girl,
file comes,
what I'm asking, girl, hold on, no, but you got to make this point for me. Just because you pull me over, regardless to the communication between you and the station, I'm asking you, am I being detained?
No, you're not.
And what I'm really asking, Daryl, what I'm really asking you is, do I have to stay there? Or, I mean, just because if you believe that I ran a light, am I being detained? That's the question that I'm asking.
If you ran a light, you're gonna be issued a citation for something that you improperly did, Dave. That's what you. So yeah. So if you want to classify that, but normally you being detained. The only way I'm gonna detain you if your file come back and there's stuff in your file like you want it, you got a revoked license or something like that. Now you being detained because you're probably being arrested. So just
was her husband being detained? Was her husband being detained?
Absolutely not. He was.
That's all I'm asking. That's
no
question.
No. Okay. He wasn't. No.
Okay, so this is a good conversation. You need to bring Judge Henry in, and because as being a public defender, I'm sure she's encountered situations like this herself and had to address them.
Okay, so as a public defender, as a public defender, one of the things that we would do is we would go and talk to young people. Because as you guys do talk about whether you're being detained, whether you're being stopped, young people don't know anything about that.
Right.
They don't know the difference. They're not trying to hear the difference. So what we would always start with is, we want you to remember one thing when an officer stops you, that everybody in that circle wants to go home. Everybody. And if that is your focal point, how you handle yourself will determine whether you go home or you go into custody. You don't have to give information. You can give your name and that's it. We call it shut up and lawyer up. That's it. Shut up and lawyer up. Let us do our job. Now, towards the end of my career as a public defender, we were blessed to have Amy Campanelli, who worked so that it became in Cook County, and I think now it's statewide, that when they got to the police station, they were able to call a lawyer. So now it's a state law that when someone gets to the police station, they are giving 3 calls. The first one must be within 3 hours of arrest. And in Cook County, Amy Campanelli, who's no longer the public defender, created a unit so that when you were arrested, it wasn't an issue of who I called. You can call the public defender and they go out 24 hours a day. All right. That part I just wanted to say. For kids, and I think we all need to encourage them, because I have 2 kids. There's an attorney called April Prayer, and she created a game called Trials and Triumphs. And it deals with all kind of different interactions with the police. It's a board game, and kids love it because it's making you think how you would respond. And you would be amazed at some of the response that kids have. So we would do scenes from those games, and then we would just say, act how you would act if you were in that situation. And then we would talk them through their response, and we had officers would say, and then my response would be A, B, and C. We would then redo the scene, showing them how we would respond and see what the outcome would be. Now, when we talk about, and now I'm shifting to the issue of detain, because first of all, it's stop, detention, custody. That's how it goes. So if an officer has a reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed or about to be committed, he can stop you. Based upon his interaction with you, he can decide that he needs to detain you for further investigation. These are how the steps go. Depending on his investigation, he can then determine whether he can arrest you. So the issue of whether you go from stop to detention to arrest, there are no hardcore facts. There are none, which is very difficult for young people to understand. Because when they get stopped, they want to know, what's the charge? Why you stopping? But if your thought process is, I want to go home at the end of this, then your behavior is going to mimic that thought process. And when a case comes in court, so when I get new cases, like on Monday when I get new cases, what I do is I read the charge to that person. And I ask them, do you understand the charge that I read? Not whether you did this or not. And because some of them get upset. I say, I'm not saying you did this. These are just allegations. And I want to know that you understand the allegation. Because on a side note, one of the things that always happened that I saw as a public defender is people didn't even know what they were arrested for. And by the time they got to me, they had been to court 3 or 4 times, which is wrong. And in that particular period where you are actually under arrest and I'm trying to decide whether you're getting out, I know your mind is on 20 different things. So I try and make sure they understand. Then the state gives me the facts of what led this person to be in custody. And based upon the facts, I will determine if there was enough to detain them. And some of the things I'm looking at are the allegations. And if it's a traffic stop, I'm looking at what caused the officer to stop the vehicle. Once he stopped the vehicle, the facts that came out of the stop, were they justified? Was there furtive movement? If it's a gun and the gun is not on that individual, whether the officer saw movement as he was in his vehicle and the other person was in their vehicle, whether the officer saw movement as he approached the vehicle, whether the officer and how close the gun was to the defendant. If this is the defendant's car, how many other people were in the car? So these are all the things that I think about, and I know the officer's thinking about as he is at the scene dealing with that situation.
Thank you so much. I have a few questions in the chat. The first question that came up in the chat was, what do you do when an officer says, do you mind if I search your trunk?
Can I respond to that one?
Absolutely.
Don't consent to a search. You don't have to. If there's probable cause for an officer to do a search on your body, on your car, on your property, then they have ways to do that without your consent. They either have what's called exigent circumstances, which means they need to do something right then to protect the safety of you or them or someone else, or they can go get a warrant. If they don't have a warrant or probable cause to do a search, is that we're talking about your car, your body, you do not have to consent to a search, and consenting to a search will make things more difficult for you down the line if something happens in terms of criminal charges. You never have to consent to a search. So that can look like, that doesn't have to mean those are the words that are being used. So that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to ask, do you consent to a search? They'll say, do you mind? Can I do this? Can you open your trunk? All of that, all you have to say is, I don't consent to a search. And sometimes officers will do the search anyway. But if you've said several times, I don't consent to this search, you're locking in protections that your lawyers can then use later on. And one thing that I forget who said it, so I apologize, but I want to piggyback. Someone said, later on, people will be able to assert your rights and to kind of fight for you later on. So we say the same thing. Like, I'm saying, don't say anything beyond what you need to say at the time. I'm saying, don't consent to a search, but I'm not saying, tell the officer, I know my rights and you're violating my rights, and I'm going to file a complaint on you, and I'm going to have your license, and those are things that your lawyers will be able to do after the fact once you're safe and home. What you can do if you have been searched or if you have been stopped in a car is there's a legal requirement in Illinois for that officer to provide you with a receipt. And so you can get a paper document explaining that you were stopped, where you were stopped, and what happened. And if you don't get that receipt when you've asked for it, then that's a violation of Illinois law. So do the things do the minimum of what you need to do in terms of answering the questions that you have to answer. Don't consent to a search, and ask for the officer's contact information, their business card, and ask for a receipt. And then if there's any rights that were violated after that, there are people on the back end who will be able to help you figure out if that's true and help you file a complaint.
Thank you. Rhonda, you had a question? Did you still have a question? Okay. I think she's saying no. Okay, so I'm
Sorry.
That's okay. It says, when protesting, can you block an entrance to a specific place? So we know we've had a lot of protests out lately, and being a social justice organizer, we do some protests. We do in terms of protesting place. You follow all the laws, and then you have the ones that's called civil something. I can't even think of the name. Civil disobedience. Thank you for helping me out. In which could be under blocking a place that you're not supposed to stand in front of. And so I guess if you're out doing some of the protests that we've seen out in the media, can you block an entrance to any location when you're out there? Is that civil disobedience or regular protest?
I'm going to say you can't block entrances to businesses and certain things, courthouses. I mean, you've seen on TV that people are usually dragged out while they're protesting because there are certain things that you can and cannot do. For us, we try to work with the protesters, and one of the things that we tell them is we're really trying to keep you safe. So you want to protest up Cicero, and I'm trying to, can I offer you an alternative location so that you can be safe and still get your point across? But do people do that all the time? No. But you can get arrested if you're in certain places that you can't be, like at a courthouse, a government building, things like that. You can't block people from coming in. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so the lawyers might have a different answer. But for us, we just try to explain to them, you can protest over here, if you want to, but could you just move from here? And sometimes they don't comply.
Okay. Anybody else want to respond to that?
I'll say that civil disobedience as a tactic is, in fact, breaking a law. Like, the people who engage in civil disobedience are prepared to be arrested for demonstrating that a particular law is unjust, or that a police force is unjust, or like the people who are engaging in civil disobedience as opposed to lawful protest are kind of there are folks prepared to be arrested. And usually in actions, that's kind of negotiated on the front end, who's prepared to be arrested. And those are the folks who typically will engage in civil disobedience. Protests, meaning gatherings of people expressing their political opinions or whatever types of opinions, are protected by the First Amendment, and people can't be arrested for protesting. There's a distinction between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Should you tell the officer when I'm stopped I have a concealed and carry?
I would. I mean, depending on the nature of the stop, I know people are doing that more, especially if it's visible. I don't know if anybody here has a concealed carry or where you keep it in your car. Some people keep it right there at the side of their console in the front seat that could be visible to the officer. So I would definitely want to let him know, just in case, because you'll get an officer that walks up to the car and sees that gun and automatically, before he even asks you a question, could take a different type of tone. So I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if you're required, but I would tell the officer personally.
And so those who are attorney and judges, what do you guys?
Daryl,
okay, Daryl, you're on mute. You still on mute? Okay. There we go.
I don't know how I went there. So normally, by me being a retired officer, of course, through the state of Illinois, I'm still able to carry my weapon and stuff like that. And so anytime, I get pulled over by the police as well. And so anytime I'm pulled over, the first thing I mention to them is that I have a weapon in the car, and I tell them position that I was once in. So that being said, you always supposed to identify yourself, let them know, officer, I have a weapon in the car. I'm a licensed carry officer. I do have my information with me. And then you present that, because once he run it, it's going to come back in the database that you're a licensed concealed carry person anyway. You know what I'm saying? So you should always let them know, just so that officer won't be surprised. Because like the panel said earlier, it's about you and he going home at the end of the day. So a lot of times, like I say, if we conduct ourselves on these traffic sites, right, then I want to piggyback on something too with the search of the car. The officer do have the right to search the car, what he see in plain, what we call in plain view. Mm-hmm. Yes. So if it's something in plain view, he can only search that area. And if the officer, like you say, he might use some trick and say, well, you mind if I look in the back of your trunk? Or you mind if I look in that bag over there? You have the right to say no until they get a search warrant or be issued by a judge or something like that. So I just want to piggyback that officer can search that area that he saw that's in question in plain view. Open alcohol in that area, something like that, or weapon in that area. He can search that he has the right to search that area.
And so my next question is about your phone. I know, Mia, you mentioned it. You said if you pulled up your stop, I think it was you that keep your hands up, don't grab your phone. But we know a lot of the injustices that have occurred have only been shown just based on a person who's been taping everything with their phone. And so can you turn your phone on and take your encounter with the police at that time? Or if a person is in the car with you, can they turn on their phone and begin taping what's going on when they're being pulled over by a police officer?
I mean, I mentioned that about the phones because the officer could mistake that for a weapon. So you have to be very careful about the sudden moves. But they have apps now where you can say a code word and your phone automatically starts recording and things like that. I personally, if I was, in that situation, I would try to record my interaction as well, but maybe try to do it in a way that doesn't cause you to get shot while you're reaching for the phone to record it. Because some of them are big and black and shiny. Now, if you got a pink bling bling furry case, I mean, I don't know if the officer may mistake that for a weapon, but if you are moving too much, and I've seen on some of the body cam footage, because, we have body cams now, where people say, I'm recording you, or officer, I'm recording you now, or something like that, but not as the officer's walking up to the car with the sudden movements. That's what I meant.
Okay.
And I'll piggyback on that as well. First of all, I just want to go back really quickly and address the do you have to say whether you have a concealed carry in the car? Legally, no, you don't have to say that. But in terms of practical, this is kind of where like there are the legal rights you have. So like under those, you don't have to say that. But practically speaking, probably better to say that. And so, but on the question that we're on now, there are things, if you have an iPhone, there are things called shortcuts that you can set up on your phone, and you can tell the phone, I'm going to say this word, and then when I say this word, do these things, start recording from my back camera, text my mom, hey, I've been stopped, call the police, like there are things you can have your phone do just by saying words. And so I encourage everybody, I have it set up where I say, hey, I'm being pulled over, and my phone will start doing all that stuff. Encourage everybody to Google how to do that and have that set up so that you're hands-free and you don't have to reach for the phone. But you do have a legal right in Illinois to record officers to the extent that you're in a public place, that you're not interfering with law enforcement like activity outside of, being far enough away basically from someone else having something done to them. So you have the legal right. Not every state has the legal right to record police, because there are sometimes like audio wiretapping like laws in other states. But in Illinois, you do have the legal right to record with audio and video police interactions. So in terms of a right, you do have that right. But again, like the practical of it, if you can figure out a way to have it done hands-free, highly encourage you to do that.
Okay. And so we only have a few minutes left. We want to make sure that our children understand how critical it is in terms of how they respond. And so what should we be doing in our churches and our schools to make sure that our children are educated on this? Because we want them to come home safely. We want you guys to go home safely. And so I'm a social justice advocate, but my brother's a retired police officer. His brother's a retired police officer. And so we have both engaged both sides of this from different venues based on our background and where we are now. But everybody, as you said, wants to go home safely. So how do we, as the church, the school, the community, make sure that our children go home safely?
I think through stuff like this. I mean, when school starts back, we fully plan on going. Now, we just focus on the high schools at this point. Not that the conversation can't be had in middle school, but to have small group conversations with real discussions with kids about their rights. That is key. They have to know their rights, but also understand that officers are going to make error and they're human, to the other officer's point. And just because you have a right, to the other lawyer's point, might not be the great time to assert that right. But as police officers, we have to understand that kids are afraid of us now. And I'm sure when Daryl first started his career, when I first started my career, it wasn't like that. So we have to absorb some of that burden of understanding that kids are afraid. And maybe they're running because they're afraid, not because they're guilty. So we have to make sure that we have open, real conversations with kids about their rights and what you can do if this A or B or C happens to you, and officers explain to them about procedures. That's for adults too. Now, when we do our Citizens Police Academy, which I encourage you, if you live in a community that has one, attend it, because you'll learn a lot about why police officers do some of the things that they do. Because if you understand that, maybe you won't be so defensive next time you come across that situation. Remember what I said about multiple cars on a traffic stop. If there's 3 cars on your traffic stop, doesn't mean that, necessarily that you've done something so wrong. So adults have to educate themselves. You have to have that conversations with your children. I've had to have the conversation with my son about driving while black. And I'm a police officer. And I had to explain to my son certain areas I really don't want you to drive in. And honestly, it hurts my feelings from a career that I love, that to the other officers' point, 90% of the officers are out there doing the right thing. I would say it's higher than that. The large majority of the officers are out there doing the right thing. But I have to be realistic about the fact that my son is a 6-foot Black man with a deep voice, and that can be intimidating to some officers. So I have to explain to him about his body language and his tone and his voice when you're talking to the officer. Things like that. We as a community, you guys as a church, continue this conversation. Now that COVID is lifting, I don't know if we're going back in COVID, whatever we're doing, when you get your youth groups together, this is the conversation that you have. You bring in speakers. It really needs to be done in small groups though. That is preferable. When we do ours, we do 20 to 25 kids a session. So we really can have that deep conversation, not only about police, but about the choices you're making, the kids you hanging with, the effect of you hanging with the wrong car with somebody, and that car stolen and you didn't know, and you got pulled over, you could be going to jail too. So you got to ask questions. Is this car stolen? I'm glad you offered me a ride, but I don't know especially if you know that kid is always in trouble. So these are the conversations that we as a community have to keep having with each other and with our children until we see the type of change that we want. And that's just my only answer to that. Just keep at what you guys are doing now.
I'd just like to add one thing to that before the next person speaks. On your police training academy that you teach the adults, I am going to be a part of the next class.
It's coming
up. The other part of that is that I work out at the community center every day, and one of the people who took the class came in every day after that class. He's 6.5 foot tall or whatever, real big, and each time he came in, he said, "I got killed again last night," because he was ready to draw his gun each time, or rather to say something back. So it lets you know as a citizen that, as you stated, you just can't respond based on, I'm going to be the hero, I'm going to be this, or I'm going to let him know how I feel. Because every time he came back from a training, he said, "I'm dead. I'm in big trouble." So you learn a lot from that, just based on dispelling all of these myths that you think about police departments and how you should respond. I'm sorry, go ahead, whoever would like to respond on that next.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you, Reverend Robbie, for inviting me. But I also wanted to add that education is a key point for this as well. And not only just educate the children or the young adults, but make sure their parents know too, because a lot of parents don't even know their children's friends, who they're hanging out with. And so to teach them something is one thing, but for them to actually know how to do it or how to respond when the police arrest them, that'll be something different. So like to develop culturally tailored messages. So like some little tips for them to remember, or something to put in their pocket, and then have meetings like Mia just mentioned, or workshops, and have role plays while they're in there. Like somebody could act like they're the police officer and give a scenario, and they do it, that way too. And then I have a podcast. I actually have two. I'm at Governor State University, and that's one way that we can come on and disseminate some information. And then in Chicago, LISC had a quality of life grant where 26 communities applied for it, and Roseland and South Shore received it. So I'm working with the whole Far South Chicago Coalition, and I have a Facebook Live every Friday. So any of you all could come on, talk about experiences, because storytelling and showing testimonies, and this happened to me, but I did this and I came out okay. Those are very instrumental too in the community and for learning.
Thank you. And Reverend Vines, we have to order a whole bunch of the games, Trials and Triumphs, so we can have it on hand to engage our youth. Because I certainly will have them in my house to engage my kids and my grandkids.
One of the things I like to start off by saying is, we need to be in the elementary school. Because when we get to high school, it's harder. It's harder because they're seeing things, they're set in their ways. So I have worked at juvenile court. I've done cases at juvenile court as a public defender and as a judge. And the statute is totally different. It's not the same statute used for adults. Right. And juveniles need to understand, the younger kids need to understand how the process works. So I know for out here in the 6th district, you can have tours to the courthouse. The presiding is Judge Tommy Brewer, and he loves when churches bring kids just to see the courtrooms. We've had them, and they were able to observe jury trials, bench trials. They were able to, when no one's there, of course, tour the lockups. They were able to see people come out of the back. And we talked to them about understanding, seeing kids, young kids come out of the back and then go in the back, as opposed to come out the front door and go out of the front door. Because most kids know somebody in that system. But when that person comes back to the community, the way they present it is not the way it is. They make it seem like it was nothing. It was just a little couple of days here, there. They're not telling the truth. But it's nothing like seeing it for yourself to say, that's not how I want to end up. That's not how I want to be. So a lot of times we need to have small groups, but we need to bring them to these courthouses so they can see what's happening. We had a group sit on a murder sentence where I think the guy got like 60 years. Their mouths were wide open because they got to see the mitigation and the aggregation. They got to hear the victims talk and the families of the defendant talk so that they could see that this is not a joke and this is not where you want to be.
If Reverend Robbie and I, when we first started us talking about this, getting the information into the middle school age group was a deep part of our conversation, and because it's a critical risk factor, for our children that's not being addressed. And if there's a way,
other people you ain't letting me in, ain't
for us
paying attention.
Mark, you're not on mute.
To drive.
No, this was before. He was just listening.
To drive this information nationally, because this is a national risk.
Hello?
This is a national risk.
You're not on mute. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's a national risk. I mean, just as critical and as important as how we're addressing the need for mask or no mask in schools now because of the risk of COVID-19. I see it as an equal danger to our children, and if it's going to be pushed and if it needs to be addressed in the middle school age groups, it's definitely up to us to make it something that's important enough to talk about nationally. So I think, hopefully this conversation will hopefully drive us in that direction.
Thank you. Attorney Jordan, do you have some closing remarks that you would like to add?
Sure. Yeah, I would say I concur with everything that folks have said. I would also say that when it comes to the police interaction aspect of it, there's a huge power imbalance when police officers are interacting with children, when police officers are interacting with adults, but especially children, because you have the age imbalance, and then this person is armed, this person is someone in power. I kind of feel like I have to either fight my way out of this because I am scared and I'm mad at what I'm seeing, or I have to just do whatever they say because I am terrified. And so one of the ways, and this is what folks have touched on, is kind of having children and teenagers understand what their rights are, but also role playing to inspire confidence, so that they know how to say, I'm not comfortable talking to you. I want my parent or a lawyer or whatever, because they've done it before with adults in their lives that they feel comfortable with. Learning those skills and inspiring confidence allows them to be able to draw on interactions that they've already had when the time comes, and that can help kind of defeat that power imbalance. But also stuff like this, I think this was great. Thank you for inviting me, and please, if you think that your rights have been violated in a police interaction, contact the ACLU of Illinois. We have an intake specialist who can talk to you and put you in contact with me or some of my colleagues, and we can talk about if there are any sorts of ways to move forward. So again, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Daryl, did you have any closing comments?
My closing comment would be that it's imperative that we as adults, especially adults who are more in tune of the way things and way power is being shifted throughout our community. And a lot of these times with a lot of these kids, what they learn at an early age is to hate the police in some cases, especially if they come from a family that they are accustomed to seeing their uncles or their big brothers or their nephews, whatever, always being in the system or being around the system because they're accustomed to hearing that. And so throughout my career, I worked in Ford Heights, Robbins, a lot of the less desirable communities for the Sheriff's Department. That's how I started the program that I started. And a lot of time we took a lot of the younger youth. You know, we took them to baseball games. We took them to stuff they weren't accustomed to, like fishing and stuff like that, and then showed them the positive side of what policing is about. And out of them programs, you'll be surprised on how many, when we started the program, or how many of them young children was so against law enforcement, opposed to when the program they graduated from high school and all that, and they continue to come back to the program and even work with the other youth that we had in there, how they understood what policing was about. So it is up to us to educate them. And somebody stated earlier that if we get to them in the grade schools, that's where you really get a chance to get to them. That's the best weapon that we could use for us to help them as we catch them young. That's just like a mother. The mother is the first teacher of the child. So that child always gonna resort back to things they heard their mother say. That's why the Army take them at 18. They don't want you at 25 and 30 because you already set in your ways. So if you catch them in the early stages like that, a lot of things can be rectified with, you know, if you got 10 kids, at least 7 or 8 of them kids gonna turn out well. They're gonna turn out well. That's my closing argument. My closing statement.
Well, thank you. Did anybody else have any closing statements? David, did you want to say anything else? You're on mute. You got to come off mute.
Okay. Just like everyone else said, I am wholeheartedly in agreement that catching them in an early age is the key. And that's why Daryl and myself, we started a program called Junior Judgeship. And what we are aiming to do as we build this program is to start with these kids at the age of 12, and not only try to educate them about the laws that they're being governed with, but also to try to encourage them to go into law, to study law. We want to eventually turn out attorneys and judges. And so what we have done is we've assembled attorneys and judges, police officers, and other political officials to try to help us to engage these kids at a young age, and hopefully, like you say, catch them at a young age and change their whole perspective in their thinking about law enforcement and just the law and politics. We want to teach them civics, because that's where we losing this whole game at, is civics. And once we can teach our children civics in the manner that they can understand, not the school system version of civics, but to give it to them in the raw, and to understand how their community is being funded in the whole game. They need a holistic education. And we believe if we give it to them in that manner, that they can comprehend. We think these kids cannot comprehend politics and law and this, but they can if you speak their language. And so once we get the people in the room with them that can speak their language, and teach them how cities are being ran, how states are being ran, how this country is being ran, and all those things in a manner where they can absorb it. We'll see a change. We will definitely see a change in our youth.
I'd like to thank all of you guys for being here this morning. This has been a great conversation. Attorney Jordan has her information or ACLU's information in the chat if you guys want to get it. I would definitely go to the website because the website has a wallet card that you can print off and carry around with you, and which tells you again all the things that have been advised in terms of how you act, that you can get access to that information. So please go and get that information off the website. In addition to that, it has a different situation, other information that you can look on there. What do you do if I'm detained? What if my rights have been violated? What happens if I encounter police brutality? You can look to see how all those things are done on that website and know what your recourse is and how to handle that. In addition to that, I think it's imperative that we continue to work together as a community, as the church, as law enforcement, as the court system, so we can teach our next generation on how to be safer and not have to be afraid of the police. I think that's imperative. And one of the things that I think that's really important, as I heard the conversation today, I do remember hearing with schools, they used to do peer court systems where the students were the ones who were engaged and ran the court, because the more that they're engaged and understand the system, the better off they will be, and then can pass that information on to their peers in terms of engagement. So that looks like something that we probably need to look at, how we start a peer court system within our churches, our schools, to make sure that we are teaching our kids how to be safe and how to engage in civic interactions, regardless of what the nature it is. I'd like to thank you all. We're 8 minutes over. Thank you for your time this morning. On behalf of New Faith Baptist Church and our pastors, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to engaging you in other opportunities to keep this conversation going. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Everybody have a great day. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right,
Officer
thank you.
Carter, Officer Carter, I
Yes, ma'am.
sent you my information in the chat.
I got it.
All right.
I'm gonna send you the info. We start in September, Judge.
Okay.
Okay.
I will
Yeah.
be calling.
Okay, David, I called you back. You called me and I called you back.
I'm working on something, and I have to have your help.